Everybody, it's Meghan DiCocco, also known as Meghan the Organization Mentor. I am here today with Erin Johnson from eXp Realty, talking about what every first-time homebuyer needs to know. So welcome, Erin. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your realty company and what?
Yeah, so I'm with, I like to say that I help people buy and sell homes and live their best lives in the outstanding state of Ohio. So, as any realtor, I'm here to help you find your next great home or help you sell a home. But I'm also very passionate about helping you really live a great life and find all the treasures in Northeast Ohio and really love living in the area. There's so much to discover. So I have a Facebook group called Outstanding Ohio where I post original content every day about people, places, and things that make Ohio great. And some other experts like Meghan, providing tips on different things to make your life easier. And so I invite you to join that Facebook group and check it out.
Great. All right. Well, Erin, a lot of the people that I work with are 20-something-year-olds. And one of the biggest concerns on their mind is they're thinking about eventually buying a first-time house. They have no idea what the process is. So consider me a brand new person who's never bought a house. Can you just kind of walk me through what that would look like?
Yep. Yeah, it can be overwhelming when you first get into it. I remember going through it myself at that age. And the first thing I would suggest is really you got to figure out what you can afford. And the best way to do that is to meet with a lender. The lender is going to look at your credit, your W-2, your pay stubs, your income, and determine if you are qualified for a loan and for how much. And, assuming if you get qualified, then you kind of know what you can afford. If it's not what you want it to be, if you're qualified for X and you really wanted a house that costs Y, or you don't get qualified, that's, I think, when you need to work with a financial advisor or work more closely with Meghan to really get your financials in order and make sure, set a goal and figure out how you're going to get there in the longer term. So, especially in this market, it's important to get a pre-approval, which is basically the lender saying, I am approving you and you are qualified to get this loan for this amount. Because once you start looking at houses, if you want to put an offer in, you need to have what's called proof of funds, which is basically saying, I have the money to buy this house at this price that I'm telling you I'm willing to buy it at. So without that, nothing else really matters. If you can't get pre-approved for a loan, unless you're sitting on cash, enough cash to buy a house, which I'm guessing most people don't, then you need that pre-approval. So once you've met with the lender, then you need to figure out what realtor you're going to work with. I suggest interviewing a couple, understanding, who you have that connection with, who you can trust, who's going to be honest with you, and because you're going to be spending some time with this person through the process, and you want somebody that you connect with and that you feel comfortable with. And once you do that, you'll have a conversation with your realtor about what it is that you're looking for. I like to do, not all realtors will do it, but I like to do a buyer consultation where we'll sit down and, just kind of say, okay, what does your dream home look like? Where is it? What kind of neighborhood is it in? How big is it? What does the yard look like? Is it a condo versus a house? Kind of thinking through all these details to get an idea of what it is that you're looking for so that we can set you up on a search. And we'll do a custom search based on the criteria of size, price, you can put a bunch of different things in there. You want a first floor master, or you want a ranch, or you want a basement, whatever it is, right? And then you'll start getting alerts from the MLS as soon as a property hits the market, or they even have a status now called coming soon. And you'll be getting these emails to say this house that met your criteria is now available, and you can click on the listing to see the details. So then you can see what's the price, the size, and the pictures of the inside, which are key. So you can start to look and see, all right, does that seem like a house that I would like? Does it meet my criteria? Has it been updated? Does it have an open floor plan? You can get a feel for it a bit from the pictures. Right. I also encourage you, especially if you live close enough, to do a drive-by, get a feel for the neighborhood, get a feel for the house from the outside, the yard, roll down your window and see if you can hear traffic, just kind of get that feel as well. But then once you've found a house or a couple of houses that you're like, you know what, this one looks good, the pictures look good, I like everything about it, I'd love to go see it, then the realtor can get you a showing and schedule you to go see it. And you'll find a time that's convenient for both of you and literally walk through the house. You can open the closets and just look around and see if it, you know, how it feels, if you notice any issues with the condition or anything like that. That's obvious. You can check that out. You can walk around in the yard, really give it a good once over. Definitely want to do that for a couple of houses. You don't want to just go see one house and be like, that's the one, because you want to, you know, have some confidence that it is the one. So see a few, but don't see, you know, hundreds, or you'll overwhelm yourself. And then when you decide, like, hey, that's the one, then you write the offer. And to write the offer, again, you need that proof of funds. So either you need to have the cash and proof that you have the cash, or a pre-approval letter from a lender. And then you have to determine what price are you going to offer. And the realtor can help you with that. They can look at what's called comps of the sales that have happened in that neighborhood recently to see what a fair price would be to offer for that house based on what's sold and its condition compared to that. You know, depending on, and the realtor can ask the seller's agent what's important to the seller, if they have a timing constraint, or you can also get some different clues if they have multiple offers, which is happening a lot in this market. You may need to offer more than asking price. If it's been on the market a long time, you might be able to get away with offering less than asking price. So you figure out what you're comfortable offering. And then you also need to determine the date that you're asking for transfer and possession. And then you can put some contingencies. So one of the most common contingencies is inspection. So you're basically saying, I'm willing to pay $150,000 for this house, but it's contingent upon it passing inspection. And passing inspection is really kind of up to you on, you know, the inspector will look and see, give it a thorough look and tell you what any major and minor issues are, but then you have to decide whether you're willing to live with those. You can go back and negotiate. If you can make an ask to say, okay, now I'll only buy the house if you fix X, Y, and Z, or if you take X amount of price off so that I can fix it, that kind of thing. And then it usually is contingent upon an appraisal, which is basically the lender making sure that it's worth what you said it was, what you're planning to pay for it. So the bank's not going to want to give you a loan for $150,000 if it only appraises for $120,000, because it's not a good investment for them. And then there's oftentimes a contingency on the sale of another home. So if you're not a first-time buyer and you have another home to sell, you can say, I'm going to buy this home, but only once my house sells. So it is an advantage for a first-time home buyer because you don't have that contingency, and you may be up against, if there's multiple offers, if one has contingent on a house sale and one doesn't, the one that doesn't is a more attractive offer because the seller doesn't have to worry about when is that house going to sell, is that house going to sell, and so forth. So you make your offer, and then the seller reviews it and decides if they want to accept it, do they want to counter. There can be this period of negotiation back and forth, usually on price, but it could be on some of the other items. And then if you agree, then you get under contract. Both parties will sign, and you have that contract with a couple of contingencies. So at that point, you'll do the inspection, see how that goes, and you do it, like I said, have an opportunity to negotiate things, or even back out of the contract at that point if you're not comfortable. And then it has to pass appraisal, kind of that check and balance. And then ultimately you get to closing, where you sign your life away, tons of paperwork. I've never signed so many things in my life. And then you transfer the title and you get the keys.
Awesome. Okay. Wow, you have given us a ton of information, but I have a couple clarifying points just to make sure that everyone who's watching is on the same page. Can you tell us what MLS stands for?
Oh, multiple listing service, I think. So that's basically the system, if you will, that most realtors are putting their listing information into. That is what feeds the Zillows and the Realtor.coms and everybody's website. It gets inputted into the MLS, and then it feeds out to like hundreds of search sites, all the brokerage sites. If you're going to the EXP site or Howard Hanna or whatever else, it starts in the MLS. It's the database, if you will, for the listing and the housing information.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Are there any houses that aren't put in MLS? Like Those people who sell by themselves, do they get in the MLS or no?
Yes, typically for sale by owners will not be in the MLS. There is some options where you can pay to get into the MLS, which is definitely suggested because most people, if it's not in the MLS, less people are going to see it.
I gotcha.
So the for sale by owner, or the FSBOs as they're referred to in the
Mhm.
business, typically you might only see on some kind of like for sale by owner site. Zillow may have them, so there could be some other sites, but it's not a large portion of the inventory of houses. Most things are going to be in the MLS for house sales. Rentals is a different story, but for sales, it's mostly in the MLS.
Great. Um, you talked about an inspection, like a house inspection. Who pays for the house inspection? Does the buyer pay for that, or does the seller pay for that? And what does that normally cost?
Yep. So the buyer pays for it. It depends on the size of the house, and if they have like well and septic, that can be a substantially incremental cost. But rough and tough, like $400 to $600.
Okay.
And it is a pretty, I definitely recommend it. It's optional. I mean, you can buy a house not contingent on inspection, but you're basically saying I'm buying this as is and I'm taking it for any problems it may have, and that can be a risk. So I definitely recommend it's worth the money so you know what you're buying, and you do have that opportunity to back out if something gets uncovered that you couldn't have known from just looking around the house.
No, that's really good. We backed out of a house that we lovingly call Mold House. Our inspection showed that the house was filled with black mold, which was not disclosed
Yeah.
by the buyer. And we were able to get out of that contract and then not buy that house, thankfully, and get a much better house
Same.
down the road.
Yeah,
So,
I know.
okay.
Right. Same thing
Yeah.
happened to us. They found it in the actually two times. The first time they found it in the attic, and nobody knew about it, so it wasn't something they could disclose. But these inspectors, God love them, they crawl into the attics and the crawl spaces and look behind the insulation, and so they find this stuff. And we weren't comfortable with it. We had other reasons. We started, kind of second guessing ourselves on that house anyhow. And then they found mold in the house we currently own, and we decided that we were going to buy it anyhow, and we were going to remedy it. We negotiated a price difference, and we paid to have it remedied after we purchased it. And it's very common to have mold, but that can be scary and hard to know how to deal with and stuff.
Right. So it sounds like, especially from both of our experiences and from you with your realty experience, that all first-time home buyers, even though it is an extra expense, really need to get an inspection, because that's an expert who can look at all the things. Like I'm not an expert on, I can tell you if the wallpaper's nice, but I don't know what's happening behind the walls or in the plumbing or.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean they spend like 4 hours in the house, and they'll produce like a 20 to 30 page report with pictures, and they'll report the minor things they found and the major things they found. So they may say, hey, the outlet in the kitchen's not grounded, or there's a crack in the window, or this doorknob thing doesn't work, or so it runs the gamut. But they look at the electricity, they'll run the furnace, they even run the appliances usually, like they'll run the dishwasher, they run the water to see if it's like causing leaks, and so they get up on the roof, like I said, they get into the attic, so they're looking at a lot of stuff that when you go to look at a house, you're just, like you said, looking at the wallpaper, you're kind of looking at the carpet. You'll notice major things, but there's a lot you could miss and not know. And in a lot of cases, maybe even the current homeowner doesn't realize that that's an issue because it's not something they see, or what, like in the case of the mold and whatnot. So yeah, I definitely would encourage it. There's some rare circumstances where maybe you go without an inspection, but to me, I don't know. Personally, it's not a risk I'd be willing to take. Like, I want to know, especially based on my experience too. Yeah.
Right.
Personal
And
experience.
it's a big investment for most people. It's one of their biggest investments. So seems like you want to take
For
care
sure.
of it. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, $400, $500, $600 in the grand scheme of things when you're buying a couple $100,000 house is worth it. But it is cash you got to have at that point to pay for that. So something you have to budget for.
Go ahead.
You can also do pest inspections. It's pretty common to have to get a radon inspection to test it on the radon levels. So those things might be another $100 or $200, depending on how many other inspections that you do beyond just the general house inspection.
Right. And would a realtor then be
And if
able
something gets
to, I'm sorry, would a realtor then be able to
oh, go
tell
ahead.
us, based on the neighborhood, if we should be getting a pest inspection or a radon inspection? Or, I mean, do different areas of Ohio need those versus others? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, the radon inspection is pretty common unless they already have a radon detector installed, then maybe you don't need to get or radon mitigation system, I should say.
Mhm.
Uh, and then the inspector can just check that the mitigation system is working. The pest, that could more depend on the area or your personal preference. Same with like a lead inspection. If you have an older house, there's likely that there's going to be lead, and so at some point you just have to accept it and know that you're going to have to deal with it. But yeah, we definitely can help guide you on what inspections we would recommend. And if the inspector finds something in the inspection, like maybe they see, like it looks like there's a lot of pest activity here, you might want to get a pest inspection. You can also do other inspections or have contractors come out and look at things after that original general inspection.
Okay. So you do the general inspection and they might lead you to other things. So you might not have to do them all, but
Correct. Yeah.
they can kind of point you in that right direction. Okay. So during the walkthrough of a house, when you're there with your realtor, are the buyers going to be there? Or are they going to be gone? Like, are you going to be able to just go and look around in their house with them
No.
not being there? Okay.
Yeah, the latter. So there's typically they leave a key in a lockbox, or there's like a code to the garage or something like that. But usually there's a key in a lockbox on the front door that once the realtor schedules the showing, we get the code to get in. And then the homeowner is not there. Typically they take their pets with them, and we have free reign to look around the house and check it out. Yeah, the only time that a buyer might be there is if it's a for sale by owner. Then a seller. And I suppose I don't know, there may be some rare instances where the seller's home for a showing, but that is not the case. Usually you've got free reign of the house, and in most cases you're not there with anybody else. There's some places will allow showings at the same time, so there may be another agent with another buyer there, but it wouldn't be the seller.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's relieving, because I know myself personally, I wouldn't want to be going around a house and like finding things that I didn't like. And I wouldn't want to offend the people who live there. But if this is the house you're buying, if you don't like the wall color, or you think the cabinets are ugly, that's something you have to talk about with your realtor. But you don't want to hurt the buyer's feelings. So,
Right. Yeah, it can get really uncomfortable.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good. So, are realtors like specific to a certain geographical area? Like, Erin, can you only work in Akron, or can you work in Akron and Cleveland and Youngstown? Like, how does that work?
The short answer is kind of yes, but no. So we are limited. There are some limitations, but they're very broad. So your license is by state. So I'm licensed for the state of Ohio.
Okay.
And then the other limitation is the MLS. So there's not one MLS for the entire country. There's not even one MLS for the entire state. So depending on which MLS you're paying into and that you have access to, that is really where you have where you can search and where you can put a listing in particular. So maybe more so on the selling side, there might be more limitations than on the buying side, but it's very broad. It's like more than just Northeast Ohio. It's all the counties of Northeast Ohio and then some. So in most cases, it's not really a restriction for people unless they're looking to move to Columbus or something like that. But I'm not the right agent to help you find a house in Columbus anyhow, because I'm not going to be driving down there to show you houses. So in that case, I would refer you to an agent in Columbus, for example. But yeah, so we're basically by state with some restrictions based on the MLS.
Okay. And I know, as a home buyer myself, and as someone who was a first-time home buyer at one point, and I remember having a lot of questions about how do I find out how much, utilities are, or how much property taxes are, or when I had a condo, how much the homeowners association fees are. Are those listed somewhere, or does your realtor have access to that, or how does that work?
Yep. So good question, because there are some, other expenses you need to be aware of. The taxes will typically be in the MLS listing. It'll tell you the taxes right in there. Homeowners association fees should also be in there, with some high level indication of what they include. But really, if you have specific questions, then you can get access to like the full list of like what can I do, like what they include, like, and what are the restrictions. So maybe if you really want to put up a fence or a shed or something, you do want to check to see if that's allowed by the homeowners association in the neighborhood. But that's usually included in the listing as well. Utilities is the one thing that is not. And that can be a little bit harder to come by. You can ask the seller's agent if the seller can provide that information. What has their average bills been? And in some cases, the seller hasn't recently lived in the home, or it might be an estate sale. But even if you can get that information, you do have to realize that utilities vary based on the usage. So if it's one person in the house, or two versus five, or they take showers every day, or they water their lawn every day in the summer, or they never use the air conditioning, or they crank it way down, like those can really make those numbers be significantly different. So even if you are those numbers, you need to kind of weigh that and take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. If you can't get the utility information from the seller, you can try to call the utility companies and ask, and or the realtor can call on your behalf, which may be more successful. But I know I called the one, I can't remember which one it was now, and they wouldn't provide it to me. So, but I've heard from, sometimes they will. So it just depends. Or you could call it, depending on what it is, if it's like a trash service or something like that, you could just call them up and say, hey, what would it cost me to set up trash service for this address? That's like more of a set expense, or to do cable or something like that. But really for like gas, electric, water, the best bet is to try to get the information from the seller if they have it, knowing that their usage may be different than yours. And then otherwise the realtor can try to call the utility companies and see if they'll share it, but they won't always share it. So it can be tricky to get at that.
Right. All right. Well, that's good. And it's good to know that your realtor can not only ask the seller for it, but it can also call on your behalf, because there's a lot to think about when you're buying a house. And once you own your house, there's a lot more than just your monthly payment that you're going to be handling. So the more that your realtor can provide, the better decision that you can make. Along the same lines, Erin, does the MLS include the school district in it? Like for those people who are thinking in the future.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and you can set that up as one of your search criteria, that I want to search. And because school districts are not a one-to-one to cities, and there can be some weird lines. I mean, this side of the street's one school district, this side of the street's another, this house is one, this house is another. So if that's really important to you, you can search by school district and not even put in the city, or you can search by city. And I mean, either way, it does list which school district that house is associated to.
Okay. No, that's good. We live in Broadview Heights, and when we lived in Broadview Heights before, when we were first married, first time home buyers, we were in North Royalton schools, and now we're back in Broadview Heights, and we're in Brecksville Broadview schools. So that's an interesting.
I don't know how they come up with this stuff.
Right. So you talked early on about the importance of getting pre-approved to see if you can actually even buy a house. So obviously, if someone didn't get pre-approved, they should not be looking for a house and calling a realtor. Is there anybody else who shouldn't be looking for a house? Like, is there anybody else that you would say, I don't think you should be buying right now? Maybe you should rent, or maybe it's not a good time. Like, would you think that, people have to be wanting to stay in an area for a certain number of years, or does it really just depend on a person's individual situation?
That's true. I mean, yeah. Well, I mean, there's if you're pre-approved for the house, but then you have the additional money to pay for all the other stuff, would be one thing. But I don't know, your financial situation. But yeah, if you're not going to stay in the area for more than a couple of years, or depending on how you feel about yard work and stuff like that, like that may be where you want to consider a condo or a house that has homeowners association that includes the yard work and the snow removal, because that's another expense and a time suck, if you will,
Mhm.
of home ownership. Is you're buying this house and then you got to go out and buy a lawnmower and a leaf blower and a weed whacker and maybe a snow blower and rakes and shovels and mulch and fertilizer and all this stuff, and it takes a while. You got to figure out how to do it, and you got to buy all that equipment. And so that's something, as a young person, if you're, single, you don't have anyone to help you with that, something to consider about home ownership, in addition to just the maintenance and the repairs and keeping up with stuff. The yard maintenance can add up. And yeah, if you're not going to, depending, I mean, the market's pretty good right now. You might be able to get away with buying a house and selling it 2 years later and making out, but that's a risk, because you have to pay. Even if you bought a house today and sold it for the same amount a year from now, there's closing costs. And then when you sell it, you're gonna have to pay the realtor and stuff. So you're gonna end up losing money if you can't sell the house for more than what you bought it for. And the longer you hold it, the greater the chance of you being able to kind of net that out.
Okay.
So
So
yeah, something to consider.
good feedback. Um, so let's say someone decides today that, I feel like I'm ready to buy a house. I know my credit is good, but I haven't gone to the lender yet to get pre-approval. But from the time that you get your pre-approval to the time that you get your keys, like I mean, what's the quickest that process could go, and what's the average that process really goes?
Yeah, I would say at least probably a few months.
Okay.
Depending on how motivated you are and how picky you are and what the market looks like, I guess. So, from the time you put an offer to the time that you kind of get the keys and move in is typically about 45 days, maybe 30.
Okay.
But prior to that, you've got this whole process of just looking and seeing what's out there and then going to see the house and then the offer and the negotiation and whatnot. But it's depending on how long it takes you to find the one.
Hmm.
And I mean, I know when we bought this current house, gosh, I think we looked for 9 months, 12 months. We looked a long time, and then we kind of had some of a deadline, and then we ended up just having to get something at the last minute because we ran out of time,
Hmm.
And actually, the same thing happened the first time I bought a house. I was renting, and that one moved pretty fast. I kind of decided. I was young, and I had my roommate was getting married and moving out, and I had this moment of like, am I gonna pay this whole rent by myself? Am I gonna find somebody else to live with me? Or like, heck, should I just go ahead and buy a house? And I decided to buy a house, and I think I had maybe 2 months left on my lease. And I thought, oh, my landlord's pretty cool. He'll let me go month to month, but he didn't agree to that. And so I had to get out. Now,
Hmm.
granted, I could have gone and lived with my parents or something, but I just didn't want to have to move twice. So I'm like, I need to find a house like in the next 2 months, might have been 2 months, 3 months at the most.
Hmm.
And I was very motivated. I was looking on my lunch hour on, online and every weekend and some weeknights going out with my realtor looking at places. And I put in one offer that didn't get accepted, and then I was like down to the wire. And I went the one weekend. I think I saw 5 or 6 houses with my realtor, and I prioritized them. And I'm like, I could live in any of these 3 houses. This is what I'm willing to pay. Go get me one of these houses like today, or else I'm not going to be able to move out on time.
Hmm.
And we made it happen, but it was tight.
Yeah.
So you do want to, and right now there's not a lot of what we call inventory out there. There's not a lot of houses for sale, and they're going quickly, and they're going for more than asking price. It's going to be harder. It may take longer as a buyer to find something that's in your price range that you really love, because there's not as many options and there's a lot of people bidding for the same houses. So you want to consider that as you're thinking about your timeline.
Okay.
And you can start to look at houses before you get pre-approved to kind of get a feel for what's out there. But at some point, you've got to decide, now I'm serious. Like, to me, once you go touring the houses, if you find one you really like, you want to be able to move on it. And the only way you can do that is if you're pre-approved. So you don't want to wait and be like, oh, maybe, and then go see a house and then fall in love with it and be like, oh, I can't make an offer because I'm not pre-approved. And then, I mean, you can try to get pre-approved really quickly, but it's just a whole lot less stressful to do it up front than follow the process.
Good. So it sounds like the more clarity that we as home buyers can provide with like what we think we want, what we've seen, what we're interested in, we have the pre-approval, the easier the whole process is going to be for everybody.
For sure.
Okay.
And sometimes it's hard. I was thinking about this. Like sometimes you don't know what you don't want or what you want until you see it or don't see it. So I know that sounds kind of funny, but for me, when I first bought a house, I grew up with a house that had a kitchen table in the kitchen. It's where we ate dinner every night. And that was like a given to me that houses had space in the kitchen for a kitchen table. And then we started going and seeing these houses, and I'm like, this kitchen's kind of small, which, I don't feel great about, but then there's no place to put the table. And I didn't realize this was a thing for me. I saw the house that didn't have the table. And then all of a sudden I'm like, no, I really want a space to put the kitchen table. I can't envision myself living in a house where I have to eat dinner with my family somewhere that's not in the kitchen. And, that maybe other people that's not a thing for. Clearly not, because there's a lot of houses that don't have that. But I don't think I realized that was one of my requirements until I went and saw it. And so working through things and I can help in the buyer consultation to tease some of that out. But sometimes you just have to work through it and then realize. And then once you realize that, that's something you can figure out from the pictures. Oh, I can see there's no place to put the kitchen table. I don't have one in there. It doesn't look like there's an open space you could put one. It doesn't look like you could, if you're willing to remodel to put it there. And so I'm just not going to consider that house because that's important to me. So there's weird things. And then the first house I bought had the closet. You had to walk through the master bathroom to get to the closet, which I had never experienced before. But after living there, I really loved that. And so I was like, oh, I like that feature in a house. Maybe I'd want that in my next house. So sometimes you just have to learn by going through the process. But the more you can have clarity on things like that, the better the process. Because then you're not going to have to go see 100 houses to figure out which one's for you.
Right.
And if you're looking with somebody else, it's important to have those conversations with them. What are your things? I've got this kitchen table thing. My husband had a garage driveway thing, which I pay no attention to. To me, it's a 2-car garage is fine, fits 2 cars. He's out there measuring, this isn't going to fit our 2 cars. And I'm like, what? Don't, aren't they all the same? No, every 2-car garage is not the same, apparently,
Right.
So he was paying attention to that. Not, so what are you willing to compromise on? What are your, things that you're going to walk away over, and understanding that, especially if one person involved. And when you're young too, if you're bringing your parents along for opinion, you should understand what role you're going to allow them to have in the process. Are they there to, consult and just tell you if there's any major red flags? Or are you looking for full approval from them that they agree that that's the house? Or do you not want them involved at all? Because I've seen various levels of that as well. And it's just the more cooks in the kitchen, if you will, the more difficult it can be in the process to get everybody on the same page about it.
It's this really interesting feedback you just gave right there, because the first time we bought a house, we were just brand new married. So my dad came with us, and because I didn't know any of this. I didn't have these questions answered for me. So he kind of helped us with the whole thing. And then when we sold our condo and we bought our first big house, both parents came in and saw some houses with us.
Okay.
And had a lot of interesting feedback, but then we stopped letting them come. And then this last time that we moved, they didn't see anything until we bought it. Look, this is the house we bought, because we knew it was important to us.
Yeah.
And we didn't need everybody else's opinion on it.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important to tell people that, they can be really helpful, but you have to know your own relationship with your family and your friends, and who's going to be helpful and supportive and who's maybe not so.
Exactly. I can remember my dad just being like, that's a lot of landscaping to, maintain and stuff that, maybe, okay, good, or my mom be like, there's not a lot of storage in that basement. So sometimes it's, yeah, stuff maybe I wouldn't have thought of,
Hmm.
times that maybe isn't critical, and then it just makes you feel bad about it, or
Right. Right. Because
trouble between you and your spouse or your boyfriend or whatever.
right. Right. Because the bottom line is you're the person who has to love the space,
Right.
not everybody else. So
Yeah. It's your money and you're the one that's got to live there. So you want to be happy with it, and for
good.
sure.
Well, good. I had one last clarifying question, and I think you mentioned it, but for someone who works full time, are realtors willing to take us around like on the night at night and on weekends, or do I have to take time off from work to go look at houses? How does that work from a realtor perspective?
Right. I mean, we try to work with your schedule. The only caveat I have to that is if you are looking around this time of year, it's really hard to look at a house after work because it's dark.
Mhm.
So, and if you, do you really want to be buying a house that you saw at night that you didn't really see the yard and you couldn't really look at the siding or the roof or the outside of it? I mean, the inside, you're still going to kind of get the same feel at night. So I do caution, and in this market too, you may only get one chance to see the house. And so if your only chance to see it was even at 5 o'clock at night, it's dark, well, 6 for sure,
Mhm.
um, one chance you saw it was at night. Is that really how you want to buy the house? But with that, kind of park that aside. Yeah, we work with you if you can go on a lunch break or at night. Weekends is pretty popular to be seeing houses on the weekends. But you do have to in this market, because it's such a seller's market. There's houses that, hey, if it hits the market today, if you don't go out and tour that house today or tomorrow, you might not get a chance to buy that house. Like, it could be sold by tomorrow. So on both the realtor side and the buyer side, you have to have some flexibility in your schedule to be able to accommodate that if you are a serious buyer, and particularly if you're under any kind of deadline to get a house. You want to have that flexibility to be like, okay, we're going to go see it tonight, we're going to go see it tomorrow morning, whatever the case may be. And then the seller has some say into when they're going to allow showings, but most sellers are pretty flexible on that as well.
Mhm.
And if it's not occupied house, there's full flexibility to when you can go see it.
Okay.
But yeah, for sure, we work with buyers on their schedule whenever we can. And but it couldn't hurt to have, if you have some paid time off, especially in the winter, to go see it during the day or to make sure you see it right when it hits the market. There is some benefit to doing that.
Great. Well, I just want to thank you, Erin, because I think this is going to be tremendously helpful. Like I said, I was absolutely clueless when we bought our first house. Clueless. I didn't know how mortgages worked. I didn't know how the real estate process worked. I didn't know that word PMI. I didn't know how a homeowners association worked. I didn't know how to find an inspector. Again, like I said, my dad kind of took us around and did a lot of that stuff with us. So I think
Yeah,
this is going to be a tremendous resource.
great. Hope
If
so.
if someone wants to follow up with you because they're ready to start looking in the next, weeks or months or whatever, how do we get a hold of you? And then, I will certainly, of course, post, your contact information, but what's the best way to get a hold of you right now?
I mean, the quickest way is probably to shoot me a text. And then otherwise, email. I'm Erin at outstandingohio.com, or you can just go to my website, outstandingohio.com, and send me your information that way.
Okay,
And yeah.
great. All right, well, I tremendously
You
appreciate.
mentioned PMI. We didn't talk about that. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, or?
Yeah, why don't we, since that just came to mind now, I was a first-time home buyer and we only put 10% down. So we had something called PMI. Do you want to kind of explain to people what that is?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's private mortgage insurance, and like Megan said, if you get a conventional loan and you put down less than 20% down payment, then that's a requirement. And it's basically the bank's way to protect their investment because they have so much more skin in the game, if you will. And it's like a monthly premium that you have to pay on top of your mortgage. And then, of course, you've also got taxes and home insurance that you have to pay too. But what I do think is important to note that we didn't also talk about is there are a lot of lending options out there to get a mortgage for less than 20%. You know, you may pay some kind of penalties like the PMI, but some people are still under the assumption that you have to have 20% down to buy a house. And that's really far from true. There's cases you could have 2 to 3% down. There's even cases where you can put nothing down. Like if you're a veteran, like there's some different programs. So of course your mortgage is going to be higher and you're going to have to pay that PMI, but it's good to know that there's options out there.
Okay. And is that something that we would be able to explore when we met with the lender for the pre-approval? Would they be able to kind of walk us through what options? Okay.
Mm-hmm. You got it.
Well, that's great. Is there any other, like, anything else that we didn't cover that you think a first-time home buyer should know?
Just looking through my notes here. I think we covered the bulk of it. I would just say, you know, again, you could potentially get bombarded by a lot of realtors depending on how you go about the process. So if you just start randomly popping into open houses, you'll meet realtors there. If you like respond to anything if you put in your information at all on Zillow or Realtor.com or any of these things, people will start calling you, and it can be kind of intimidating, like, oh my gosh, there's all these people trying to like sell me, and you know what's going on. And so you do maybe want to give some thought up front about what realtor you want to work with. And I do encourage you to interview a couple of them, at least till you find one that you are comfortable with, because like I said, you are going to be spending a fair amount of time, somebody that's going to listen to you and that you can trust, and so forth. But don't be so intimidated by it that you're like, I don't need a realtor, I don't want to work with these people, because there is a lot of benefits, like I said, to working with one. You don't really have to pay for it, and we're here to guide you through the process, because it can be very overwhelming. And everything from how to write a good offer, how to negotiate it, how to manage through the inspection, you know, make sure and give you the context for inspectors and home insurance and things. Like we have those connections that we can really help you out to take a lot of the stress out of the process. So it is overwhelming to think about it all at once, but we're there to guide you like step by step to make sure you know what you need to be doing and when. And so you can be talking to realtors like while you're working through the lending process to start to get a feel and do that too. And of course, I'd love to be considered in that process. But just, you know, in the end of the day, I want to make sure you're happy with your person. You can ask friends and family for referrals if you know somebody that's bought a house and see what their experience has been. But ultimately go with somebody that matches your style and communication and that you feel comfortable with, because you're putting a lot of trust in that person to help you with this big purchase.
Right. Well, thank you so much. I know that this is going to be a tremendous resource to everyone who has a chance to watch this, and hopefully we can help a lot of first-time home buyers feel a little bit more confidence, a little bit more peace, maybe not as much stress as I experienced when I was buying my first home. So thank you.
Same. Yeah, it can be very stressful. I appreciate you having me. This was great.
Great. Thanks, Erin.
And good luck to all your people out there.